The U.S. Ordnance Corps. The biggest bunch of buzzkill, boring individuals to ever have held a committee. All these really cool projects that could have been, but were not, thanks to these individuals who are in charge. And remember to never forget what they took away from you. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35 scale US T18 HMC. The model in this video is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This is definitely not your average standard type build, and the model itself is built mostly out of the box. However, I did go ahead and add several custom details to it to bring it to the condition that we have here. In this video, we're going to be going over all of these detail modifications as well as improvements that were made to the model, as well as giving this thing a thorough in-box review. So stay tuned because there's going to be a bunch of really cool and interesting content coming right at you. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the US T18 HMC, or specifically the T18 howitzer motor carriage. The vehicle here dates back to 1941, so right at the beginning portion of the war, and was when the development first started. The idea was to have a vehicle that had a 75mm main howitzer that was fully armored and was self-propelled, and the point of this vehicle was to give close support for the infantry. The idea is pretty sound and was one that was utilized by all the major powers during World War II, from the US to the Russians to the Germans, of course. In this case over here, the armament was the 75mm pack howitzer, which of course at the time was in full production and was widely utilized by the US military. And for the chassis of choice, they went with the M3 Stuart light tank, which again was in full production and was being fielded by the US Armored Corps as well. Automotively, the vehicle was identical to the M3 Stuart. The big change, though, was the fighting compartment. Rather than having the interior layout for a turret, this section was replaced by an all-cast casemate type design that had the 75 mounted on a pivoting rotor. The rotor itself was lifted from the M3 Lee series, but rather than having the long barrel 75, it was adapted to fit the shorter and much lighter 75mm pack howitzer. By 1942, two pilot prototypes were produced by the Firestone Company of all people, and they were sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground for testing and evaluation. And while they were there, they didn't exactly perform very well. One of the biggest problems that the T18 had was that the vehicle's casemate design, along with the armament, made it much more heavier compared to a standard Stuart, and because of that, the front suspension did sag. Some of the other issues that the Army had with the design was that the silhouette was too tall, and also the Army wasn't exactly a fan of flat vertices for side armor, which is actually kind of funny coming from the US Army specifically at this time. If we've seen some of the other tank designs of the period, such as the M6 or the M3 Lee, and arguably even the Sherman, it kind of flies in the face of that. But either way, before the engineers were able to come up with solutions for the various issues, be it stiffer springs or a different type of casemate design, the Army decided to drop the project altogether by 1942 and move on to this vehicle's successor, which at the time was being research, called the T41. That vehicle is a really interesting vehicle in its own right, but that would be the topic for another video for another day. After the project was shelved, the Army retained the two pilot prototypes for the T18, to which they kept them on inventory until 1947 or so, when the genius decision was passed from above to have them scrapped. So sadly, they are no longer in existence for us to enjoy. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35 scale resin 3D printed T18 HMC kit from the company SS Model. For anyone who's a fan of the channel, of course, the obligatory thank you for that. And if you're not, be sure to subscribe to this channel. But back to the model that we have here. This is not the first, nor the second, nor the third. In fact, I think this is probably the sixth or so resin kit from this company that I've done a review on up to this point. Over the last year or so, and I'm definitely not seeing an end to this, I've been acquiring a number of their kits to my collection for a very good reason. This company here, in my opinion, is actually cranking out some of the more unique and interesting releases that I have been seeing in the 1/35th scale now in a large number of years. SS Models is a company located out in China, and they specifically produce 1/35th scale and smaller as well as larger kits in 3D printed resin. This is a very interesting material, and it's also a very interesting company. What's really cool about them is that they've been doing subject matters that are way off there in left field, and it's stuff that would probably never have been made in plastic or probably would ever be done by a standard injection molded plastic company. Although a large number of companies have been tooling up really cool vehicles similar to these ones over here, by and large, their vehicles tend to be ones that were just ignored by these other manufacturers, and that is awesome. As I mentioned in a number of these videos, this company to me reminds me a lot of the old garage cast resin kit companies from the 1990s timeframe. Companies like Accurate Armor come to mind, or CMK. It's in that same skies, and it's almost like the spiritual successor to those. Because again, back in the day, they were producing kits similar to this out of a similar media. The difference though is that those other kits were made out of cast resin, while these are made out of 3D printed resin. The two are very similar to one another, but there are things that you can do in print that obviously you can't exactly do in cast. This kit is a really new addition to the stash. I think I picked it up about 2 or 3 months ago, so it hasn't exactly been sitting in the shop to gather some surface dust. These models here are exclusively sold on their eBay store. So if you're watching this and you're the old boomer type where if it's not in a brick and mortar store, you know, you're not interested, well, you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone because these kits are not exactly things that you're going to find in a brick and mortar hobby shop. And if you do, well, then you better thank the lucky stars because your hobby shop is God tier. Generally, these are the type of kits you're going to find online. And like I stated before, these are sold on SS Models eBay store. The link is listed in the video description below to the store, where they have a multitude of this as well as all the other really cool and awesome kits that I am definitely going to be adding to my collection as time goes on in a multitude of different scales. More about that to come. Back to this one here, their kits are also fairly affordable. They retail anywhere between 40 to about 80 US dollars, and this kit here was somewhere in between. I want to say it was about 50 or so, give or take, depending on if there's a sale or not, but regardless, they are really affordable, specifically for the medium that they are made in. Also, shipping also tends to be on the affordable end. Sometimes it's free, again, depending on if there's a sale or if it's the holiday season, to, again, a price that's really reasonable. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start with the review. So starting with the box art and graphic design, this one here is one of the most current kits that I've purchased from them. In the past, the layout was a bit more simplified, so I guess they're evolving as time goes on, and more likely as they develop more kits, and probably you're getting some decent sales. So the kit that we have here has been in production, by the way, for a little while. They are a relatively new entry to the market. I just stumbled into them about a year ago, so it's probably within the last 2 or 3 years I think that they've been around. And this kit here has been around for a similar period of time. This one though is the most current version. By the way, the company does often upgrade their kits with better printers and also more higher quality and higher resolution prints, and that's one advantage print has over other mediums. You can have the same CAD file and just bump up the resolution when the ability does arise, but I'm going off the subject right now. Back to the box art and graphic design. So the other ones just came in a standard El Cheapo garage kit type white cardboard box. This one here comes with a box that has some nicer graphics, or I should say a more professional look to it. So right here we have something in Chinese, or Mandarin I should say, and I believe that's just the SS Model logo, which you can see right over here. Has a nice velvet type feel to it, and on the top here we have a nice little sticker with the CAD file of the vehicle in question with a interesting camouflage pattern applied. Again, minimalistic type graphic design on the box itself. Tells you it's 3D printed. We have the information right over there. This, by the way, for those who are interested, is kit number 35523. Of course, it is 1/35 scale, and they do offer this in a multitude of different scales, both small and larger. That's basically it for the graphic design. Oh, there was a little quality sticker right over there to keep the boxes one piece. Obviously, I cut it when the model came in. More about that to come. So to open up the box, this is done by just sliding it open. As you can see, it's not like a flap box. It's a straight up opening type box like this. Again, I guess you could say it's really nice. So here goes the kit contents. First, we have here a little printed diagram of the kit components. This is a somewhat simplistic kit, so the part count is going to be very, very, very low. And that's another thing about their kits. They tend to be, because of the 3D printed material and technology that's being used here, they tend to have a minimalistic part count, which makes the builds actually fairly easily built, more or less. More about that to come. So here we have the part count. We have the main hull itself, some sections of running gear, as well as another fret of just some other odds and ends. Here we have the instructions. They are still very garage kit, where it is literally just a printed type pamphlet. Looks like something done literally on your home printer at home with your laser printer. Again, very simplistic kit to build. As you can see, very few detailed parts that need to be fixed, where you can fit everything on a single page. Should allude to the simplicity of this kit. If anyone's seen the other SS builds I've done in the past, I recommend checking those out if you haven't. And if you have, chances are it's going to be fairly familiar. So everything on these kits are printed in resin, and they're printed in this orange, flesh, beige color material. I have seen a number of other 3D printed components and kits out there printed in the same or a similar material. Most of the time they tend to be from overseas, from companies like T-Rex and even Dragon's getting in on it. So probably this is more or less an industry standard type material. Starting with the part itself, I'll take the largest section right here, which is the hull. So one thing that's nice about this material is that, unlike plastic kits where the upper and lower, as well as a few other components, are separate molded parts, on these guys here, they are a single printing, but are a hollow printing, or from this example and some of the other examples I've built, that was definitely the case. Let me go ahead and open up the little Ziploc bag here that all the parts are contained in. The parts are also decently packaged, as you can see, wrapped in bubble wrap, but I'll go into more about that later. I'm definitely concealing something. So here you get to see the bulk of the model right here. As you can see, even though the model is 3D printed, the surface is very smooth, and you don't have as many print or scan lines that are typically found on other homebrew or lower end type prints, which is again indicative of the quality of the kits in question. Like I mentioned before, everything is integrally printed. Here we have some underhull details. We have the rigidity bulges over here. Here we have the transmission, as well as the little U-shackles integrally printed on one piece. No extra parts need to be fitted or glued on by the builder. On the side hull over here, we have just some basic detail components. Basically the hull mounted sections for the suspension, as well as the return rollers. We even have the little shipping cleat right there, which is an iconic bit of detailing found on the Stewart family. As you can see, it is integrally printed on, and it has the appropriate shape to it. One thing about these kits is with the way they are printed, we have this trestle type support system, as well as with all these little lines here that are used for the printing method. And this is basically the most amount of cleanup that the builder does have to pay attention to. You have to go in here with a clean cut snip and basically trim everything off. Very easily done, and it's just something that comes with the territory. We'll see how this entire chunk here gets removed as the video goes on. But as you can see, just like with the other models I built from them, it has all these little struts and trestles that do need to be trimmed away. On the surface detailing over here, you get to see the printed on details. Hopefully one gets in focus. You can see the panels as well as the fasteners. You can even see the detailing on the tin work. Now, from what I'm seeing here, this kit looks to be something that was originally done in a smaller scale, and then they bumped it up to 135, and a number of their kits that seems to be the case with. I ran into that with the other howitzer carriage vehicle that I built shortly before this one here, where that one definitely showed its smaller scale nature. The reason why I say that is because some detailing that you can get in the smaller scale, once it's blown up, or I should say some of the detailing in the larger scale can't really print all that well when it's miniaturized. So a lot of times some shortcuts are taken and design changes are made in order to print in that smaller method, which works fine at 172 and smaller, but when you bump it up to 135 and larger, that's when things start becoming a bit soft detail-wise. This one here, I am seeing some of that, but overall, it's still really, really good. Back to the section over here, you got to see the Browning 1919. Hopefully the holes on the barrel shroud over there pop out. Again, integrally printed on. Same thing with the one on the opposite side. The holes are very, very clean and crisp and look fantastic. Perhaps this kit here was upgraded for the larger scale, but so far what I'm seeing here, everything looks great. On the rotor drum over here, you got to see the top detailing. As I mentioned before in the spinny spin section of the video that preceded this, this is definitely just lifted from the M3 Lee 75mm pivot. And you can see the exact same detailing found here on this section, the periscope and all. We have the hatches. They are integrally printed shut. This is one aspect on these kits that may turn off some other builders out there. A lot of people, they like to render hatches in the open position so they have a crew member or using a diorama. On this one here, that's not going to be the case. They are printed solid shut, so if you are going to have to make the hatches open, you are going to have to do some scratch building to do that. Same is also true for the guy here on the front. However, as you can see, the model is hollow on the inside, so perhaps it's something that may be doable, but I'll just leave that to whoever feels inclined to do that modification. Because it is printed hollow, it is very light. It's definitely not as hefty as some of the other ones that I've done in the past. You can see the back detailing over here. You can see the rivets right here on the side, as well as the storage boxes. We have the rear engine deck detailing, and it does have several little tie-down points for tools and other bits of equipment. Those look to be the fuel cap fillers right over there on either side. We have a little handle integrally molded in here, but there's one absent here. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a mirror image. I will have to look at some pictures online to see. And it doesn't look like if there was one there, it broke off, so I'm not sure about that. We have to verify. On the back here, we have the tools integrally printed on. This is something that I've seen different on other SS model kits. Sometimes they are integrally printed on. Other times they are separate prints and you have to snip them off and glue them on. This one here, it's definitely the former. The quality of the prints look fantastic, so you could easily, well, not easily, it's a little tricky to do, but the detailing is nice and crisp. The renderings are very good. And so if you have a good enough paintbrush and the right consistency paint, you should have no problems with painting the tools on the model. I'll circle back to that as the video goes on, of course. Ah, looks like there is a little handle. It's right there, it's stuck on the side. Ah, just caught that. Cool. All right, and yeah, so far everything, so far so good. The next set of parts is in this little cage that we have here. And looks like this one here got a little damage during shipping. Let's go ahead and pour the parts out. Obviously, this is the remainder of the small detailed bits that are required to build the model. One thing about these parts, or just 3D printed kits in general, instead of the parts being on a sprue as we're used to seeing on injection molded plastic kits, 3D printed parts tend to be in a little cage like this just to prevent them from getting damaged during shipping. This is quite typically seen on all the 3D printed kits that I've worked on in the past, and even some of the 3D prints that I do come in a setup similar to this where there's a guard protecting them. So with the camera brought in closer, let's go ahead and look at the parts that are supplied. We have here a little sleeping bag, quite typically seen. I'm probably not going to use it. I'm not exactly a fan of sleeping bags on my builds. We have here some sort of a storage box. We have, looks like some kind of a square stock. Not sure if this is part of the kit or if this is just a sprue that just snipped off. Hard to tell, but I'll just put that over there. We'll see how that works later on. We have two tripods here for the two Browning 1919s. Because there's two 1919s on the vehicle, you get two tripods. Tripods look fantastic. They are rendered in the retracted state, and these things are a dead ringer for the real one. They have the the adjustment bar right there on the back. That's in its tucked away spot. The front leg is folded over, and it does have its tie-down straps integrally printed on both the hind legs as well as the midsection right over here. The tripod itself does, yeah, the scoops are there on the bottom portion of the legs. These are perfect. These are literally perfect. And because they are a single piece, just paint them, weather them, drop them in place, and call it a day. Set those aside. On the remainder of the runner, we have here the headlights, along with their brush guards. They appear to be a two-part assembly. I like the way they position them on the sprue. I basically do the same thing on my sets, and they look fantastic. They have their bulbs integrally printed on. Hopefully you can see it right from here. On some SS kits, I've seen where sometimes they're hollow, sometimes they're not. I've even seen cases where one is hollow and one isn't. So on this one here, that's not the case. They are both just standard prints rendered with the lens in place, just like on most plastic models. We have here the early pattern siren. Looks pretty good. It's on the mount, integrally printed, which looks great. On other pieces in the past, it looks like that the front portion of the siren does not have that distinctive V-shape grill. This is something that I actually have a resin casting for. I may go ahead and modify this. We'll see as the build goes on. We have the oil bath air filters right over here. If anyone has ever worked on a Caterpillar, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And they look great. They have the little hose clamps right there in the center where the elbow is. They have the main clamps that strap it to the side or the corner of the vehicle. And the geometry is spot on. These are fantastically detailed, and there's nothing more you can want. On this section here, we have the front portion of the trunnion with the Pack 75. The Pack 75 appears to be the exact same CAD file used on the other howitzer vehicle that I built previously, which is great because the Pack 75 looked fantastic on that set. And this one here appears to be the same setup. Everything's nicely detailed, nicely rendered. Looks great. Obviously, on this one here, you do not have the ability to make the thing pivot left and right or go up and down. So that is also something typically seen on these SS kits. What you see is basically what you get. This is something that may dissuade some people out there, but again, if you're just looking for a simple build like this one here, like I'm going to be doing, the barrel in its condition should be perfectly fine. And this leads us to the last parts bag found on the set, which is the suspension. And this is something that's very interesting found on the SS kits, is that the suspension and track are printed as an integral printing. This is something I've mentioned on all the other builds, and it does have its pros. However, it does also have some cons that go along with it. The pros is that it is really easy to assemble. I mean, this is what Lincoln Link tracks pretend to be, and they fail. Whoa boy, do they fail at it really, really, really badly. But because everything is integrally printed, it's literally like a cartridge. You carefully snip it away and just drop it onto the side of the tank, and you're done. The downside on this setup is that it does make painting of the unit much, much more difficult. In fact, this is the work of the entire build right here. The entire build itself is pretty much simple, but when it comes to paint work, this is the job. This is it right here. It's going to require some precision painting in order just to get all the components properly painted between the rubber portions of the track, the guide teeth, the suspension, the tires, the rims, the sprocket, the inner sprocket. All that stuff needs to be hand painted and painted carefully. Of course, I'll go over that as the build goes on. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. Is it difficult? Is it better if it was separate parts? Oh, you betcha. So, but again, if it's between this or individual Lincoln lengths, oh yeah, I'll roll with this all day long. I have no problems with this. I'll take this. I'm cool with it. But having said all that, here you get to see the track section right here. As you can see, it's a Stewart pattern of vehicle, so we have dual bogies. We have the sprocket right there. It has the intricate star center rim. It does have some fastener details on the sprocket tooth. The inside does have its Stewart hub geometry. Hopefully it comes out on camera. It's a little tricky to get. Perhaps when the video goes on, I'll be able to show you all in better light. The VVSS suspension looks pretty good. You can see the spring detailing right over there. Has the right geometry for the end plate. The struts and the H-frame are all nicely rendered out. And you can also see how the wheels look, where they have the tire distinctive from the rim, which makes painting and weathering much more easily done. The return rollers are right there. You can see they have the safety wire integrally printed on, which is a very nice bit of detailing. It has the fasteners and even the center Zerk fitting. On the rear idler wheel, it's a Stewart idler, so it has the support arm, it has the tensioner right there with the fastener. The one thing that it is missing, however, is the round section that's right over here. If anyone has looked at a real Stewart tank, you will see that there's a chunk on the casting that looks like a cruciform and it blisters out from this section here. That is missing on the SS kit. Outside of that, the skid rails are present. You can see them hopefully right there. And it even has a little shield present as well. Again, overall very nicely rendered out. As for the track, well, I'll go ahead and use this one here because this one here is contained in that little cage setup, while this one here, the cage, is broken from shipping. And we'll get to that momentarily. So you can see what the track looks like. It is your typical rubber rubber block pattern of track. The track looks... Oh, I mean, it's okay. It's all right. It'll work just fine for this build. But something tells me there's a slight error with the pad here. Generally, they tend to look wider with the rubber pads on these tracks. It's just one thing that just stands out to me from building all these things and seeing them in person. But regardless, it's more than suffice for the task at hand. It's just a small little critique I did want to mention. But everything looks great. Everything's distinctly printed. So, as you can see, everything is awesome. But if anyone has seen the other videos on these SS kits, the one attribute that I've seen and had happen with them is they generally come in busted. This one here is no exception. As you can see, the teeth in this section here are gone. They're just missing. They cracked off. In shipping, they're not in the parts bag, which would normally be the death knell for this kit. But that is not the case. You see, one thing about SS Models, and it's the one thing I really love about this company, is the parts do have a bad habit on coming in busted. However, their customer service is top notch. I'm serious. They have one of the best customer service of any of the kits manufacturers and sellers that I've dealt with in the industry so far. And I have done business with lots of different companies, from Armortech to Tamiya to Italeri, and all of those that I just mentioned do have some pretty good customer service, no bones about it. But these guys here are fantastic. They really do stand behind their product, and the parts came in busted. I took a picture, sent them an email on eBay, and they quickly went ahead and shipped me the replacement parts, which are nicely packaged in this box over here because I actually bought 2 kits from them, and both of them came in busted. As for what the other kit is, well, I'm not going to go into that right now, even though you can probably see part of it through the bubble wrap. But what is it? Ooh, you're going to have to watch this channel to find out when that video gets posted. Here you can see the new packaged parts, though, however, wrapped in their bubble wrap. And the reason why I'm showing this is because they packaged the things very well. Even though they did package it well the first time around, but they still came in busted. Then second time around was the charm. And again, I paid Zippo, not even shipping, to get these parts sent to me. Again, their customer service is most definitely top notch. Just go ahead and unroll this, and what's really cool was I just needed the one side section, but they're so awesome. Instead of just sending me the one, they literally sent me a brand new pair right here. And as you can see, the pair are in immaculate condition. There's one, and there's the other, still contained in the sarcophagus. Like I stated before, I've done about 6 of their kits, and of that number, I believe 2 of them came in intact. 1 of them came in busted, but I was able to do the repairs and fix it. And the other ones came in damaged, but they sent the replacement parts. So again, it's a grab bag. However, I will say this, if you buy any of their parts and they come in busted, just send them a message and they will gladly oblige. And here's the model back in the shop. Since the previous scene, the chunk in the back has been eliminated, and it was removed really easily with just a pair of clean cut snips. Unlike some of the other examples where I had to use the multi-master, on this one here that wasn't really the case. Just a few strategic snips here or there, and the whole chunk just popped right off. Then with the clean cut snips, I progressed to delete and remove as much of the little remnants as I could. There are some left that's going to be polished down with needle file and some sandpaper, but more on that to follow. The one thing I noticed about this one is that there is some of this resin residue that's left on the surface over here, and I've heard less than great things about that, specifically in terms of getting it on your hands. So if this happens to you, you want to first wipe that off the surface. Paint's not going to stick to it, it's just not going to do anything good. But also you want to make sure you take the right safety precautions, because apparently that stuff is not exactly very, shall we say, non-toxic. So on this one here, I am going to go ahead and clean it off, and I'm going to go ahead and take care of that before this thing progresses any further. So I wiped the area down with some mineral spirits on a rag, and that seemed to do a pretty decent job. However, I was also looking online, and a lot of people who do resin 3D prints like this also like to wash their parts out in denatured alcohol. So since I do have denatured alcohol lying around, I'm going to go ahead and just submerge the lower portion, seeing if that has any effect. There is some residue on the surface. You can probably see it's a little bit shiny over there. I'm not going to touch it for the reason I mentioned before, but regardless, I'm going to go ahead and bust out a cast member from the OTR series in order to go ahead and help me out here. Unlike the OTR builds where I go ahead and submerge the entire model for a good duration of time, this one here, it's a little bit more topical. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in my little pan over here and basically, well, kind of like I'm going to deep fry it. So I just need the bottom hull soaked anyway, and this should do the trick just fine. Have here a little rag. I'm just going to go and wipe this section down a little bit more. Be interesting to see how this pans out. By the way, I've never messed with this resin before, so I honestly have no idea what type of solvents can be used on the surface to help get rid of that residue. Like I stated before, I was looking at some YouTube tutorials on other YouTubers out there that are into 3D printing, and they recommend a similar solution. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. And after about 5 minutes or so of just wiping with a rag and continual dipping in the denatured alcohol, I gotta say that those guys were absolutely correct. It worked as advertised. The denatured alcohol did a fantastic job with dislodging and removing any of the residue on the surface, and it did a far better job compared to the mineral spirits in comparison. So if you have one of these 3D printed models and there's some resin residue on it, denatured alcohol is definitely the way to go. With the hull set aside so it can dry out, I'm right now going to turn my attention to the track sections. The track sections, in order to remove them, I need to first cut away the cage, and then I need to remove the pilings that are holding the units up. These pieces kind of remind me like a dock, where you have tons of little pilings on the bottom portion in order to give a platform that holds up the main section. To do this, I recommend the Multi-Master. So far, of all the tools that I've messed around with on these kits, the Multi-Master is the best for surgically removing the cage, and also in one fell swoop knocking out all the pilings in a nice clean manner that allow the part to just pop right off. When working on one of these kits, you're going to be using slightly different tooling compared to normal plastic models. So you're going to be using, you are going to be getting a good use out of your clean cut snips. However, not many 1/35 scale kits out there require the use of a Multi-Master. So as you can see, the cage is the first thing that needs to be removed, and with the cage out of the way, I have full access to get to the pilings underneath. I'm going to speed this thing up a little bit more, just so it has a bit more speed in order to cut through everything in a faster manner. I'm on the fence on which way to go. If you go slower, it might be better, or faster might be better. Slower might put more vibrations on the part. Faster might cut through with much more ease, but perhaps the shock of the vibrations might cause damage as well. So I'm still figuring this out, but right now I'm going to try going with a little bit of a faster speed, and let's see how that works. Okay, I damaged a tooth over there. That's okay, it's right here. Let me go ahead and set that aside. Let me try going slower. Maybe that might work. Nope, looks like that did the same thing. So, I guess this one's all gonna be done by feel. I'm gonna go ahead and go with a mid speed. And I lost another tooth. Okay. Oh, no, I got it. It's right here. It's okay, everyone. That's what super glue is for. I think I found the optimum solution. The best way is to go at high speed, but you gotta hold the unit with your hand like this so everything is nice and tight up and close. And because it's your hand is giving support to the part and it's reducing the vibrations to only the areas that need to be cut. So far, I've been having some really good luck with it at this point, so let's see if that luck continues. With the Multi-Master, I am able to get the blade flat against the flat portion here of the base, and that allows me to make the cut with much precision. There we have it. Piece came right off. There's the base. Don't need that anymore. Whatever remnants are left, I could take care of with the clean cut snips. As for the busted pieces of track, I will go ahead and super glue those guys back together. As well as throw away all of these bit of filings that are left on my pants. Before I can go ahead and get the tracks ready to paint, the last bit of detailing needs to be added to the rear sections. If we look here on the stock unit, here we have the stock idler mount, and as you can see, it more or less has the detailing and the appropriate shape required for this part. However, it does leave for a little room for improvement. That would be on the face section over here of the rear housing, and also on the top portion. On the rear housing, there would be this half round section that's in this section over here that has this distinctive rigidity brace that is integrally casted in. This is absent on the stock printing, or at least on this generation of stock printing. On the top portion, there would be a skid rail also present. The skid rail basically looks like the one that we have here, only slightly different shape, but it does basically the same thing. It just prevents the track from slacking around and potentially bumping into this area here, and it gives it just a little bit more extra tension. So, in order to get the model ready for painting, I'm going to go ahead and add these details. And on this one here, the details have already been added. So here you can see the face detailing that I mentioned before. This has been dropped in place. And it completes the look and really refines it a bit. And also you can see the skid rail that has been added on the top portion. For the cap itself, this is a new 3D printed component that I designed. And here I have some on the table. I had a couple extras made. And these ones here are printed in a resin. And as you can see, or hopefully as the camera could zoom in, it has the appropriate detailing for this part, be it the geometry as well as also the cruciform shape. Not to mention the center fastener that does the tensioning for the spring in the middle, but that's also another bit of detailing that's present on the printing. These pieces here are just a sample set I had run off by a friend of mine. These pieces, however, are going to be listed on the ECA 1/35 scale catalog and can be found in the Shapeways store link listed below. In addition to the caps, I also went ahead and originally designed the skid rail. Unfortunately, these ones here came out a little too small, so on this model here, I just fabricated out of some thin aluminum that I bent to shape and just glued it in the appropriate location. For this build here, it's perfectly fine. However, for the actual production sets, I'm going to have them included as well, so you have everything you need to go to get off the ground. As I often mention in these videos, because these items here are 1/35th scale, they are not going to be found on the standard ECA catalog page, as the ECA catalog is dedicated to 1/6 and 1/16 components. Because these are 1/35, these are going to be relegated to the ECA Shapeway store, where I have components and upgrade parts for models in smaller scales, be it from 1/72 all the way up to 1/35. Well, this clip didn't really age very well. When the pieces were originally designed, yes, they were originally intended for uploading onto the ECA Shapeway store that contained a bunch of components in smaller scales outside of 1/6 and 1/16. Sadly, since I recorded this clip over here, Shapeways went under, and it actually left quite a substantial hole in the market that honestly it's still recovering from. However, the parts are still going to be listed, but they're going to be listed now on the ECA website proper, where I have a catalog page just for 1/35th scale items. Also, in case anyone's wondering, yes, I'm in the process of actually creating a website specifically just for the 1/16 and the 1/35th scale components, as this is something that's long overdue. But anyway, on the catalog page, over the next few months, I will be re-adding all of the legacy items that were originally on Shapeways that were lost over time, and these are in scales from 1/72 to 1/48 to 1/35. In addition to the legacy items, I will also be adding new items that I had in the lineup and were things that were going to be added to the Shapeway store as well. Either way, these pieces are still coming back, and the link for the time being can be found in the video description. At the moment, I'm having trouble using FTP because of my hosting server, but once that's resolved, you will see a lot of new items being trickled on, and when they do get added, they will be mentioned and showcased on the ECA Facebook page. All right, without further ado, let's continue with the video. Again, the link to both the Shapeway store and also the link to these direct components can be found in the video description listed below. Jumping forward a little bit further, here we have the model now fully assembled. At this point, it's ready to slide off with the paint. The suspension is not glued on at this time, as I like to pre-paint and weather these off the model, for reasons that I've talked about in ad nauseum now in many of my videos. But again, with something like this, you want to thoroughly paint off the model because it allows you full access to get everything thoroughly painted, weathered, and all the effects applied. Otherwise, good luck trying to get to these recesses here with the thing fully built, which a lot of people tend to attempt and do for some reason that baffles me. And you could tell from a mile away because you just can't get paint in some of these recesses, or you're not going to be able to successfully weather these parts with all the techniques that you have when 3/4 of it is covered up. Yet somehow you'll still see it and it'll stick out like a sore thumb. Don't be that guy. Paint and weather your tracks off the model, specifically if they are in this type of format. Even if they're in a single piece vinyl format, those are the last things that get added to the build. I've seen way too many YouTube tutorials out there where they don't do that, and it's just confuses me so much. As for that, or outside of that, you can see some of the other mods that were made. On the back section over here, I added the mesh work on the bottom portion. This would be meshed up on the real units, just some spare mesh I had from another project on hand. Cut the shape, glued to this area here, and once it's painted and weathered, it'll look great. I also went ahead and fabricated out of thin aluminum the supports for the two rear boxes. This is as per a real M3 Stewart that I actually saw in person, made a walk-around video of on the ECA channel. Taillights have been added. These are Resin copies from another 1/35th scale build that I did many years ago. Since I do a lot of rebuilds sometimes, and taillights are the type of things I love to get missing, it was a good idea to make a mold of that part, and these parts here have been cast and used on several other builds for the last number of years. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. They do the job and look great once painted and weathered. They're definitely an improvement compared to the kit original ones that I mentioned before. On the top portion, you can see I added some handles to these sections. This one here was broken. This one here, I amputated and replaced it with another metal one just to keep continuity, so all the handles are the exact same size. The little handles over here were fabricated out of bits of metal. The kit supplies you with a tarpaulin that gets glued to the section over here. However, that too's even missing its handles. But the recesses are found in the model. So what I did was I just took some floor wire, bent it to shape, and glued it to these locations here. Once they're painted and weathered, it should blend in pretty well. Also in this section here, you can see I added some more mesh work, which on an M3 Stewart would be found in this location. Again, lifted as per the real vehicle, made with the same mesh that I mentioned before. On the front portion of the model, you can see that I went ahead and replaced the siren with the funnel siren over here. This is admittedly not, it should be the early style football pattern, but unfortunately I don't have my other replacement one on hand. For some reason I can't find the mold, so I just went with my other replacement version, which is the later pattern. It's still okay for this build. It's just not ideal, but it's more than enough and still better compared to the original molded-in one. The headlights have their power cables added in place, just thin floor wire drilled into the model, and then I went ahead and snaked it accordingly. The other mod I did was on the front portion here of the transmission. I added the fastener locations with a pin vise. On the front portion of the Stewart, near the final drive section, there are some fasteners in these areas over here, and these are absent on the stock printing, so I went ahead and just simply drilled out the locations, give you more detail. Once it's painted and weathered, it will blend in perfectly. Also in this section here, you can see what the new ECA component looks like while fitted in place. It definitely fleshes this area out and fills it into a more appropriate look compared to the way we had it before. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead, get this thing off into paint. Starting with the tracks and the suspension, this here was the entire work of the model. The tracks, I was able to deburr them, as we saw in the earlier scene. However, after the deburring process was done, one thing I didn't mention earlier was just how difficult it was to get them onto the model. The holes lined up more or less exactly where they needed to go. However, what really is something to watch out for on this build is just the sheer fragility and frail nature of the suspension. Unlike the T6 prototype or the self-propelled version of the M3 Lee that I recently completed from the same company, the Stewart suspension over here is so much more frail. It's ridiculous on how easy it is to break. This thing just wants to snap in a multitude of locations, from the center portions of the track to the teeth. I have busted and lost more teeth on this build than a 19th century British guy with scurvy. It's crazy how many teeth I popped off. They are ridiculously frail and fragile. Even after the model is completed, just handling it, I busted a tooth or two. Fortunately, they repair very easily. Granted, you can find the thing if it lands on the floor, and a little drop of super glue later, and they're good to go. But it was a bit hairy throughout the process of the build. And where things become even more hectic is with the paintwork, because again, this is a pontoon type system. Trying to paint the tracks in a all-complete format is something that does add the most amount of complexity to this build, aside from just general handling. As I mentioned in the other builds that were, again, similar to this, you really need to be on the ball in terms of paintwork, because you have a lot of surface area, and you have about 3 or 4 different type of components that are found on this integral piece here that need to be painted separately and weathered separately from one another. So for instance, we have components here that are made out of steel and components that are made out of rubber. Of the components that are made out of steel, some parts are going to be part of the tank, so they need to be painted and weathered the same as the tank. Then you have other components that are, for instance, the guide horns on the track, which are a different type of green or an olive drab. And these, again, are slightly weathered differently compared to the steel here found on the rear idler wheels, or even the top return rollers. And then for rubber, you have the rubber on the inner pad, the outer track pad, and on the rubber tires on the road wheels themselves. So, a lot of different medias that are represented on one integral piece. So again, paintwork is going to be something that you're really going to need to pace yourself with. For the paint application on the tracks, it's the same exact story as with the other ones, because frankly, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the entire track pontoon itself was first thoroughly primed with flat black spray paint, and then after that was done, it was then time to paint all the parts with the olive drab that would be, of course, part of the tank. And unlike the rest of the tank where everything is painted via the airbrush, for the suspension over here, this is all done with the paintbrush. So now you have to have the paintbrush techniques ironed out as well, i.e. you need to have the paint at the proper consistency, and you need to have your brushes all squared away. You have to carefully go into certain recesses, namely the inner portion here of the sprockets were the most difficult, as well as the same can also be said with the inner areas here of the row wheels on the suspension housing, as well as also on the rear idler wheel. And with the nature of the paint is, you may need more than one coat. I believe it was about 2 or 3 to get the opacity up to where I was happy with it. And then from there I was able to progress with the remainder of the paintwork, namely painting the rubber tires. And on this vehicle here, the rubber tires were a bit easier to paint compared to, I believe, the T6, where or not the T6, the M3 Lee, the artillery version. The name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, on that one, I believe it was a bit trickier because there was no clear delineation between the rim and the rubber tire itself, which made paintwork a little bit more challenging. However, on this one over here, there is a step up from the rim to the tire, and because of this, it makes guiding the paintbrush a bit easier to get the paint where it needs to be. The flat black, I believe, was Tamiya flat black. I didn't use rubber black on this one, just Tamiya flat black was used on all of the rubber surfaces, and also anywhere that needs to be touched up on the rubber pads themselves was also done with a Tamiya flat black. The rubber look was applied and weathered via the airbrush, and this was done with just some diluted flat white that was airbrushed into certain key locations, and that was good to go. The next thing to mention are the guide horns themselves. For this, I went with my typical format of using Tamiya olive drab. For the guide horns, when it comes to US guide horns, you do have quite a bit of options available. I've seen them in olive drab. I've also seen them in a parkerized metal type color, and both are perfectly suffice. The one reason why you don't necessarily see me go with the parkerized look very often is because it's kind of tricky to have a clear delineation on the parkerized versus the rubber. A lot of times they tend to match each other color-wise, and a way to get more contrast, I like to have the teeth be a color that's definitely noticeable. So that's why you'll see me on my American builds, regardless of scale, I tend to roll with an olive drab color for the guide horns themselves. The guide horns are weathered with a dry brush with some silver paint for the scratch appearance that we have here, and then for the metal components on the wheels themselves, these two were applied with the paintbrush, and was the same type of silver spray paint that I use for the dry brushing. I spray a little bit on some cardboard, and with the paintbrush I then carefully apply. So on a Stewart, why this is relevant is the return rollers as well as the rear idler wheel are steel rimmed. There are some variants of the Stewart rear idler that were rubber rimmed. However, the one that's depicted on this example here is the steel rimmed variant. And this is just like with the Sherman. A lot of people tend to make a mistake. They seem to think that all the tires are rubber rimmed, and that's not the case. For a Stewart, that is absolutely not true. The three return rollers on the top, being an M3 or an M5, are steel. Keep that in mind. Same is, again, also true for the rear idler wheel. So once everything is properly weathered with the appropriate colors, this is the final look that you have here, and it really just makes the model just look complete and makes it just flesh out more appropriately. The other thing I do want to mention, of course, is wouldn't be an ECA video if I didn't. On the center portion here of the return rollers, we have a Zerk fitting, and this is how you would actually lubricate the thing with a grease gun, and the fittings are almost always painted in red. They are integrally printed on. The only thing you have to do is the builder with a little swipe of red paint, add to each of these locations, and the build will be more complete in that respect. And this is not just true for the SS kit over here, but the same is also true for any other 1/35 scale or larger M3 or M5 vehicle that's on the market. Also on this portion over here, hopefully it comes into light, but you can see the addition of the ECA end cap along with the skid rail, and with these details fitted in place, it really completes the look of the unit quite nicely. Continuing with the lower hull, the last thing I do want to mention is with the little tie-down cleat that we have here. This was integrally printed on, as I mentioned before. It's a nice touch. However, during the course of the build, one of the pieces broke off. It's not hard to do because of the location during the construction. You're always touching it and you're always doing stuff, and it's not too impossible of a thought for the piece to crack off. It is quite frail, it is quite thinly printed, so this is something you want to pay attention to. Fortunately, I was able to fabricate a new one. I just took some styrene and I carved it to the shape of the cleat, and I was able to add it. Because it happened to one side, I did to both sides, again to keep continuity. And with the camera readjusted, you get a better look at the grill work that I was referencing before, and this also greatly improves the model as opposed to just leaving it absent. And it's also in this location over here where you get to see the exhaust hood effects that were added, and this is actually quite relevant because the exhaust manifolds would be in these two sections here on the real vehicle. And on the topic of exhaust hood weathering, this is also something that I've seen, just like with powder fouling on armament, tend to be a bit overdone by many builders out there. I've seen lots of builds where it is greatly over-weathered and over-exaggerated, where you just have huge, big poofs of exhaust soot on the rear portion of the manifold, and that's just not the case. When these things are driven and are driven for quite some time, yes, you will get some exhaust to it and it will be intense in the location that's immediately in front of the exhaust manifold. However, the spread is not nearly as wide as we tend to see on a lot of other builds out there. So that is something you want to pay attention to. If you're the type of guy that loves to weather things, just tone it down a little bit on the manifold exhaust as well as also the powder filing as well. It's just a way to just help the build overall. Before we depart from the rear, it takes us to the rear taillights. As I mentioned before, these were upgraded. The stock ones were just completely flat, had no detailing on them. So I added new cat's eye lenses from a cast resin mold that I have on hand for this type of application. And now that the unit is painted, I painted in the usual format where the cat's eye on the left-hand side is painted in red, while the square light is painted in silver. On the reverse side, it's the same format, only the cat's eye is actually painted in gloss black. This is something that is commonly seen on many U.S. military vehicles from World War II all the way up to really the present day. Moving towards the sides of the vehicle takes us to the air cleaners, and as I referenced before, these are oil bath air cleaners, and this is something that is very commonly seen on heavy equipment of the period and even after the World War II time frame, and the Stuart here was no exception. The units actually have oil found in this bottom portion here of the filter, and this thing just straps to the main canister itself. And why this is relevant is because in terms of weathering, you will always have oil, sweat, and seepage in this section here where the bottom pan makes contact with the top. And this is something that's just a magnet for dirt, so if you are a person that's into weathering these things, this is something you want to pay attention to on your M3 Stuarts. On this one over here, I made it where it's a bit sweaty and just a little swipe of Tamiya Gloss Clear was added to this location here, and the same was also done to the unit on the reverse side, like so. One other thing to mention about the air filter is on the top deck. Carefully hold this so I don't break any more track links. On the top portion, we have the canister, and it connects to this elbow that goes into the engine compartment. And it's connected with this little bridge piece here, and this is actually a rubber connector that's hose clamped in place. The hose clamps generally are the same color of the vehicle. However, the rubber sleeve itself is actually black, and with a little swipe of Tamiya rubber black, I was able to add that little accent here to both of these units on either side. And as you can see, it's just another little enhancement to the build that's already there. No scratch buildings required. You just have to know about it and paint it accordingly, and the build will be just, again, more complete and more proper looking in that regard. And while on the engine deck takes to the Pioneer tools, these are the integrally printed ones as I mentioned before. The kit ones are very nicely detailed, nice and crisp, so this actually makes painting them a bit easier. But again, like I always mention on these builds, if you're going to paint the tools on the model like I did over here, you need to make sure your paint and brushwork are squared away. Namely, again, the paint is at the proper consistency, and your paintbrush is not frayed, and you're using a good paintbrush. The better the brush, the more precise and the more clean the final outcome will be, and you'll get something akin to this. Also, on the tool work, one thing a lot of people, again, fail to realize is what's actually part of the tank and what is a tie-down. On the American tools, we have a lot of clamps like this one over here on the axe, the pickaxe, as well as the shovel. Those, of course, would be part of the tank. But in order to keep the tools tied down in place and prevent them from falling around and wobbling around while the tank's in operation, they are strapped with either a leather or a webbing type material. And on US vehicles, you do have lots of options between colors, so you can go with a leather color, or you can go with a khaki color of one flavor or another. For me, I went with a green drab for the actual straps themselves. Just a little swipe or two was really all that was required. In addition to standard green drab, you could use Tamiya khaki. That will also give you good results as well. I don't really like to render the leather because the problem is the leather, in my experience, tends to blend in too much with the wood color of the tool handles themselves. So just to get some contrast with colors, I tend to avoid making it in the leather color. But if you want to, it's perfectly suffice. Also on the rear deck, we have those tie downs I mentioned before, and these are made from thin strip of aluminum. I actually misspoke. I said they were made out of fluoro wire. Not the case. Thin strip of soda can aluminum, cut very thin with a scissor, bent to shape, and then applied to the appropriate locations. Once painting and weathering is done, this is the look that you have here. Also on the front portion, You can see the grill work that was added to this area here. This immensely helps the model overall, and it's something that is a bit of an oversight, admittedly, on the stock tooling, but it's one that's easily remedied. The trick is you need to have the mesh with the appropriate weave. This one here, I again had on stock. It was just spare from another build from God knows when, but I was able to carefully cut it to shape and apply it to the right location. When you're gluing on mesh like this, specifically to a flat backing, you want to make sure you use the right amount of glue or the right type of glue, because the problem is if it's too runny, it can easily plug up the meshwork itself, and you're not doing yourself any favors, and it becomes a bit of an eyesore. Also on the meshwork, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I also made a little strip here that goes along the top. This is something that would be found on the M3 engine deck itself. And by adding that little strip out of thin aluminum, it again just makes the model look that much more complete. And it's also a way to hide and conceal any glue sections where the piece was glued on, because I believe I glued this in 4 corners. Again, just so to minimize the amount of glue required and get the piece fastened in place, so once it's painted and weathered, it looks clean. Continuing further brings us to the side hull here, and there's where I also made some modifications that I neglected to mention before. First thing I want to mention is with the fighting compartment and the remainder portion of the vehicle. If we saw the model originally, this here is just one continuous section and there's no clear cut line. However, on the real vehicle, these would be 2 separate components, so there would be a natural seam found in this section right here. If we can notice, the section does have its riveting present. This is true to form to the real one. However, right next to the riveting, there would be a seam line. The seam line itself was added via the Multimaster. It is the perfect tool for the job. It makes a nice, clean, straight cut that's also evenly cut, so it just makes itself for a nice bit of detailing once completed. Obviously, this was done to both sides, as you can see. And once the cut was added, obviously it polishes the build up further. On the topic of polishing, the other thing I want to mention is with the texturing, because the entire fighting compartment here is essentially just one giant cast unit, there would be texturing about. So the texturing was absent on the stock tooling, and in order to improve the model further, the texturing was added. I believe on this one over here, I utilized the Tamiya texture pavement paint, and it was applied to the surfaces with a paintbrush. After a coat or two, this was the final end result. And once the camera is brought in closer, hopefully it comes out in camera exactly what the effects look like with the cast texturing in place. And as you can see, the texturing really enhances the model and just gives it that final polished look. The texturing was applied to the sides, the front, as well as also the top portions as well, which is evident, or should be evident, once the camera focuses in. Moving forward takes to the 2 MGs. Of course, this being a M3 pattern, you just have to have it bristling with MGs, and this one's no different. So the 1919s are the kit supply ones, but here you get to see what they look like painted and weathered, and with the dry brushing, it really gives you a good effect on the shroud itself. As for the holes, they look okay. In my opinion, I think they're a little too small and too numerous for a proper 1919 A4, but they still do the job regardless. If this is something that does bug you, there are replacement 1919 options on the market from Aber that are made out of brass, and those are something that can enhance the model further. While on the topic of 1919 sticks to the tripods, they are the kit supply ones and apply to the appropriate locations. The tripods themselves are painted with the same Tamiya olive drab that I use for the teeth, because again, you want contrast, and also generally when you see these tripods, they tend to be that shade of olive drab in person. The little straps that are integrally printed on were painted with the green drab, as I mentioned before, for the same reason. But also as a quick little addendum, I'm sure maybe someone out there may have noticed it, maybe they wouldn't, but I actually caught it when I was looking at the piece in more depth the other day. I stated before that the 1919 tripods are the same, but they are actually a mirror image CAD file, and this is actually inaccurate. On the tripod itself, there is this little sleeve that goes up and down the leg over here when you deploy the thing, and it's only found on one side, the part that goes up and down. However, on this one here, you'll see it's a mirror image. So this is something that maybe, now that I've mentioned it, it's one of those things that you can't unsee. For me, I don't really care. It's perfect for this build, but if you're a purist out there and you're looking to really go the extra step, the extra effort on the build, this may be something to pay attention to, where you can either just make a mold of this section here, cast a fresh one, and drop it in place, or find any other type of solution. But if you're a rivet counting snob, yeah, this is definitely something that may irk you a little bit. Me, I'm cool with it though. Also on the front here, takes to the siren. You get to see what it looks like in its fully completed manner. And you also get to see the power cables that I referenced before that plug into the headlights. And as I touched upon earlier, it really does a good job with fleshing everything out. This brings us to the front and also to the front transmission fasteners. Earlier in the video, I mentioned I drilled these sections out. However, since that clip was recorded, I went ahead and took some sewing pins and added them to the 4 locations that we have here. Again, simulating the fasteners found on the real unit. Also, you'll notice that the one in the center here is left absent. This is true to form to Stewart's. If you've ever seen a Stewart of any flavor, be it M3 or M5, this is exactly what the front portion looks like. Moving up takes us to the armament. Nothing much to talk about over here. The stock one is awesome. It was just simply mounted out of the box after the thing was thoroughly painted. And this brings us to the grab handles. Like I mentioned earlier, the grab handles found on the 2 top hatches as well as the 2 on the rear deck were replaced with metal wire, again to keep continuity. And now that the model is fully painted and weathered, you see what I'm referring to. It looks nice when everything is the same size. It just makes the model look just that much more polished. And that's all there is to the detailing, and this takes us to the paintwork. I already mentioned briefly the paintwork for the tracks. However, for the remainder of the vehicle, the paintwork was done in a similar way. It's also a way that's similar to, and almost identical to many other builds that are found on this channel for good reason. So first off, the entire model is thoroughly primed. I use flat black El Cheapo spray paint for my primer. It works great, it's affordable, and when you build a lot of models like I do, it tends to be very beneficial, specifically when the end result works perfectly fine. For the base coat, I went with my exterior flat latex house paint. This is again a point of contention for some builders out there. When they see my videos and I mention this, they tend to go crazy for some reason. But again, it works great. I come up with my own custom mix. I have it made at the Home Depot, and I have a gallon of stuff that lasts me for quite a while, depending on how many 1/6 scale tanks I build. Because when you build a lot of 1/6 scale tanks, yeah, you drink a lot of paint pretty quickly. But even though I use on my 1/6 scale tanks, I also use on my smaller scale ones as well, be it 172, 148, in this case 135. The paint is applied via the airbrush, and it adheres perfectly well to the primer that is beneath, leaving for a nice opaque surface. Once the paint is applied, I then go ahead and begin the weathering. And just before I forget, as for the paint color itself, this is the standard US World War II shade of olive drab that I cobbled together several years ago, and I've been using it ever since. This color is the same color that we've seen on several other builds found on the ECA channel in a multitude of different scales, because, well, it works well. Back to the weathering, the first thing that was done was some counter shading, or actually no, the first thing that was done was some lightning effects and sun fading effects. This was done with some diluted cream that was applied to the surfaces, lightening up the color, and then from there I go with the counter shading. Now the counter shading that we have here is a mix of some dark olive drab and also some just diluted Tamiya flat black. These were both applied via the airbrush, as well as the lightning effects that I mentioned before. After the airbrush effects were done, it was then time to do the panel line accent, and this is done with Tamiya panel line accent, black specifically, and with a vehicle like this where you have lots of riveting and most importantly, lots of little nooks and crannies, the panel line accent does a fantastic job going into the locations where it needs to be, highlighting them, and really making the model look that much more improved. If we look here at the front section, you really get to see what I'm referring to. It just soaks into these areas over here very nicely, and it just makes the model pop quite well. Same is also true again for grill work. It absolutely loves grill work. After the panel line accent were added to all the appropriate locations, I then went ahead and used dry brushing effects for the chipping that we tend to see on my builds, and that's basically the end result there. After the chipping was done, it was then time to add the markings. For the markings on this vehicle here, these were just some spare water slide decals that I had in my decal bin. I believe they may have been from Trumpeter, maybe Tamiya. Hard to say, it's just, they're literally just some spare decals that were floating around, and the decal quality themselves were excellent. They went out without any problems, and then I went ahead and adhered them to the surface with the VMS matte varnish, leaving for the final result that we have here. The VMS varnish, as I always mention in these videos, is an excellent product. It gets applied via the airbrush. It self-levels. You just apply it, set the model aside, let the thing do its job, and the end result will always be fantastic. The advantage about the about the varnish, it seals the markings to the model. You don't have to worry about them flaking up or blowing away or brittling up over time. And it has a fantastic effect of making the markings as flat as possible, where it gives a almost painted on effect, which is exactly what you want. Furthermore, it does a good job with reducing or eliminating any sort of silvering. That is something that plagues many decals out there. And as you can see, there is no silvering to report for this build. So in the light, as it pivots around, the decals were excellent and they made it extremely well and paired well with the VMS matte varnish. After the varnish was applied, the last thing I do is the silver bits. So like the shiny bits, I should say, like for instance the headlights, those get painted, the taillights, they get painted with gloss, and I also add a little bit of sweating effects to the fuel filler caps right here on the rear, as you can see. And that's really the last of the paintwork that's required to get the thing polished up to the way we see it presently. And in the end, I am absolutely thrilled on how this model turned out. This was an awesome and really fun little build, and it just came together really, really nicely to the condition that we have here, and it's definitely going to be greatly appreciated in the collection. As I stated earlier, I have a real soft spot for prototype or even paper panzer type builds, and this one here definitely ticks those boxes, and it's just a nice, fun, flavorful build in order to complete and actually have the opportunity and the privilege to work on. And it's most certainly because of kits like this is why I definitely will be adding many more SS model kits to the collection. In fact, I've already done so. A lot of them are already finished, waiting to be filmed, and that's something you're just going to have to wait for when they eventually get posted. As for when they do, well, that's why you have to subscribe to the channel. Builds like this, I absolutely just adore. And kits like this just make the job and the hobby just so much more enjoyable. In the past, if you wanted this type of kit over here, the only option available would have been to scratch build it. So you have to roll up your sleeves and you're going to have to go ahead and go in raw in order to do it. And to do this type of a build in the past, you have needed a donor kit of one flavor or another. There are several M3 kits on the market, so you have the old one from Tamiya, you have the new one from Tamiya, you have the versions from Academy, and those are just a few that come to mind. I believe Mini Art might have jumped into the M3 market, but either way, you would have to start with something like that, and then you would have to hack up and scratch build and go at it from that point onward. Well, you can obviously still do that, but with having an actual out-of-the-box kit of this vehicle over here, this definitely cuts a lot of corners, streamlines everything, and just makes for a more pleasant build experience overall. And that is the perfect point to shift gears and pivot us into skill level and recommendation. So straight out of the gate, if you are a beginner modeler, don't even think about it. This is definitely not beginner friendly. This model here is going to be something that if you try to attempt, it's just going to go downhill very quickly, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience for all that's involved. If you are an intermediate builder, perhaps you can tackle this kit over here. As we saw from the unboxing portion, it is somewhat simplistic. However, it is also fairly misleading because of the nature of the tracks and also of just the media that this thing is made in. Unlike a standard injection molded plastic model kit, which is much more forgiving, the 3D print resin type material that this thing is made of is something that will take some finesse and will also take some skill sets in order to be able to work with it like I did here. If you have some pretty good skill sets ironed out, or if you've tinkered around with 3D printed plastic, or I should say 3D printed resin models before, then yes, then you should be able to tackle this build and have a good go at it. But realistically, by that point there, you're effectively a advanced builder. And even some advanced builders out there, there's some guys who thump their chest saying, I can build basically anything, but the only thing that they know of is really working in plastic polystyrene. Even some of those guys, they're going to have a bit of difficulty with working with the medium that this thing is made in. This thing here, again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of harkens back to the old cast resin kits from back in the day in the 90s. And if you grew up or worked with any of those kits from back in the day, then this kit here becomes something that you can easily work on. Which is actually funny to say because the build itself is actually rather misleading. It is fairly simplistic as we saw in the unboxing. There's a quite limited parts count out of the box, but where things become tricky is with the suspension. The suspension is really the work of the entire model, if I didn't already say so. And working with it, handling it with it, trying not to break something most importantly, is definitely something that adds an immense amount of complexity to this build. Outside of that, the build went together like a dream. The model, I will also say, if you're looking to get into 3D printed resin kits and you've maybe built one or two other kits before, this one here actually becomes something that's viable because, again, it's not overly complex, but it's something that should really just stretch your skill sets out in order to go ahead and get the thing fleshed out. But, like I mentioned before, if you do not have any skill sets at all in working with resin or 3D printed resin, then this kit here may be something you want to pump your brakes on. As we saw in the video, the stock offering is fairly good, however, it does leave some room for improvement, many of which I already discussed and made to this model to bring it up to the condition that we have here. However, if you do want to take the thing further, because this thing is a Stuart-based vehicle, there are several detail aftermarket options on the market that can be added to this model over here to take it to the next level. Several accessories are found in photo etch, and I'm pretty sure these days you can find accessories and upgrades in 3D print. Also, I just want to throw this out there because, again, the suspension was the real hardest part of this build. There is a aftermarket polystyrene suspension set for the M5 or M3 pattern of vehicles that are on the market from AFV Club. Those things, being polystyrene, are much more forgiving and easier to put together, and I wouldn't be surprised they're actually somewhat functional. And you combine that with the aftermarket workable track links or single-piece vinyl tracks for the Stuarts that are, again, from AFV Club that are on the market. Those can be added to this model over here to really enhance it further if you want to take it to the next step. Where something like that comes in handy is, well, you're having complete crap luck with the stock suspension, is driving you up the wall and you just want to get rid of it altogether. Or if you're going to put this thing on a diorama base and you want to have the suspension articulating for one reason or another, then in that scenario, those tracks and suspension set would definitely be something to look into to enhance the model further. But again, this is all left up to discretion of the builder. For my needs over here, the way you see it works perfectly fine. Nothing much more needs to be said on that, so let's go ahead and wrap this up with recommendations. So if you are a person that is a die-hard US tank fan, this vehicle here is going to be recommended. If you're a fan of prototype or experimental vehicles, again, this kit here is going to be recommended. If you're a fan of the Stuart family tree, obviously this kit is going to be recommended. Another person who I'd recommend this kit to would be anyone who's an avid fan of those MMO tank games, specifically World of Tanks, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe this vehicle here is represented and is a playable vehicle in that video game. So if you're one of those people that likes playing those games, and this vehicle here is one that you love to zip around with and blow stuff up and have fun with, that's great. And if you want to have a model of it in your collection in the IRL, this kit here obviously will scratch that itch quite nicely. Granted that you have the skill sets I was referencing before, but let's just say you do and you also love the tank game, boom, this kit here is going to be, or should be, something to consider and be on your radar. And several other videos with vehicles of a similar subject matter. If you're just looking for something different, just something that is off the wall, off the beaten path, this kit here is going to be one you're greatly going to appreciate. Obviously, a casemate, self-propelled artillery version of a M3 Stuart, that's a hybrid of the Stuart and M3 Lee, is definitely something that is rather unorthodox, to put it mildly. So again, it's a fun project in that regard. If you're the type of person that also likes to customize models, This kit here, again, going to be recommended because, as we saw, it leaves several room for improvement, and this is something where you can just pick up the slack as the builder and complete the build accordingly to your requirements. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/35 scale US T18 HMC. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/35 scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where it's a great way to see more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on the channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.